every learner is time-starved in every organisation. I always see this. It's a real challenge. Training is difficult in every organisation, but we critically need to upskill people. So the logistics and distribution world is looking at how do we upskill people? We've got a lot of, let's call them the more mature people in the organisation who are going to be leaving, taking all of that knowledge with them. So how do we build people up through there?
Welcome to Chain Reaction, the podcast for the supply chain and logistics industry. If you enjoy this conversation, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Welcome back to the Chain Reaction podcast. I'm Michael, CEO of Flux Logistics Marketplace. This podcast is brought to you by Flux as a way to engage with logistics and supply chain professionals to explore ideas and people and innovations that are shaping the industry. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel. It helps us grow and reach more people who will value these conversations. Today, I'm joined by Terry Simmons, founder and CEO of eLearning Plus, a business that has been helping organizations develop skills and capabilities through digital learning. Terry, great to have you here.
Hey, great to be here, Michael. Looking forward to this.
Terry, I typically like to start kind of going back a little bit, and I start with kind of an early day. So you've launched the business about 15 years ago. So at the time when digital learning wasn't kind of particularly widely adopted or was in wider use. So where did the idea come from? What made you confident enough to actually start to build the business model, the business idea around the platform at that stage?
It probably stems from we started with a colleague of mine, a digital marketing business, and that was in the days when people weren't talking digital marketing. What we really meant was we were creating digital content in all different kinds of formats. So lots of thought leadership pieces, all for different technology companies. I come from a technology background. Some of the big blue chip organizations people would know. And we had to be really sort of quite inventive with how we created lots of different kinds of digital tools that people weren't using. So boring thought leadership pieces, how do we make them more interesting? How do we get exciting video content? How do we get animated content? How do we use interactive PDFs and ebooks and all different ways to bring this to life? So we were doing a lot of these kind of developments. And along the way, the sales teams would say, well, could you look at our PowerPoint decks? They're pretty poor. We've got Elvis Presley clip art, 1,000 bullet points on a page, not really working. So how do we make that work? So we said, yeah, of course we did. And we started working on those. And then some of the training departments inside the organization saw some of the things we developed and said, oh, could you do that for our training? And we said, yeah, of course, we'd love to do that. Give us your PowerPoint decks and we'll have a look. So we started creating and building some really strong training materials that were landing well, that weren't text heavy, that introduced concepts well. And then these organizations started saying, oh, well, could you start developing some online learning for us, something a bit more digital? And we thought about it. We said, well, yeah, this fits with what we were doing, really, which was giving information. How do we best give information, make it exciting? So then we moved into instructional design. We started looking at e-learning authoring tools, and these were in the early days, and just really looked at how we could bring that learning alive. And so that took us more and more into that e-learning space. And we actually found it was something that we were very good at and enjoyed doing. So that's how we started, really.
Well, it's an interesting story. I mean, you obviously you talked about your journey, but but also what it tells me is actually there's been quite an evolution of the e-learning kind of tools and approaches and methodologies overall. I mean, I remember in the early days as well. I mean, you were given 300-page presentation saying, go and read it, and this is your learning for the day. With today's things are completely different. So can you talk a little bit about the evolution, kind of? Not just conceptually, but kind of what it was many people have seen, but especially what it is today, what it looks like today. What are the toolkits are available? What are the approaches that you found are useful, working, and impactful for the colleagues?
Well, probably a number of people might remember the old days of CBT, computer-based training. Where you might even get CDs, and you may even get floppy disks with things on, where some people would put those through, and You'd load it up on your computer and it would take a while. And I think the big advent that's changed things. People might also remember the days of modems and the strange noises that went on with content trying to stream over this sort of very limited bandwidth. So I think bandwidth and the evolution of bandwidth's changed things massively. I think the ability to work with audio, the ability to work with video, the ability to bring a whole set of different sort of media capabilities together has helped. So a lot of the tools were I would say very basic in the early days. Think PowerPoint, early days PowerPoint, bit of screen based, bit slow. We might have some things going, but not lots of video. Audio was a bit difficult to sync. So all these things were problematic, really. Whereas you look at nowadays, with the advent of the technologies that we've got, the computer speeds, the RAM, the memories, the bandwidth of the internet, full fiber, all of these things have brought the ability to bring lots of different sort of tools together. So you can now develop some really interesting, pieces. You can develop ebooks to support blended learning. You can create things that support classroom-based learning. You can have knowledge-based tools that are supporting, things which I call the flipped classroom, where you do your knowledge piece before you come into the classroom. So in that case, you have a workshop. So all of the technology components have really allowed us to change things quite significantly now. We can also start looking at case studies online. We can start looking at scenarios. If you're in a classroom, you can be working through. We can score things. We can see what people are doing, what they haven't done. We can quiz them on things and do assessments. So the technology has moved on massively in those 15 years.
Well, I can also imagine that it's not just the technology, it's also the understanding what works and what isn't. Because many people are talking about gamification of learning. There are upsides and downsides to that. So it's either it could be engaging and focus maintaining, yet not let quite a shallow learning in the sense that people forget fairly quickly because it's kind of it was like a game. Some people were talking about AR, which is, or even the virtual reality, kind of the goggles and some of the learnings in that space. So that's quite interesting. Would be quite interesting to explore. But one of the things in particular that I'd like to talk about is for the space for the industry that we're in logistics and supply chain. There's quite a big, I wouldn't say gap, but there's a very small roster of different options that people take in terms of kind of being educated and being kind of an upskilling and learning about the sector. A lot of the education historically has been happening on the job through apprenticeship or just simply on the job learning and banging your head against the wall and learning something that way. So, but the e-learning and various tools are now coming in. So can you talk a little bit about the kind of the toolkits and applications of this in the logistics and supply chain sector across variety of roles?
Yeah, I think the world of learning has changed. So if you look at the days we've come from, apprenticeships, you might do a degree, you might go and do a master's, and then outside of that, it gets a little bit more challenging. We've got the courses. Training company might come in and run some courses, but what we really want to see is pathways of progression. So how do we take people through pathways in different roles within the logistics and distribution world? How do we guide that? So I think the difference we're seeing now is the ability to set pathways, whether those are role specific. So if I'm in the warehouse world, what does that mean? Can I up my skills and understand the world of warehousing, how to deploy that, whether that's in supply chain, whether that's in transport and logistics. We can set some of the knowledge now and have paths of delivery where you would have had to go and take time out. Always difficult in the real world to take time out to go on courses, to go on, seminars and to go to set places. We can actually build this knowledge and capability from subject matter experts from within the industry, and we can give people the chance to work through that content in a sensible way, because every learner is time starved in every organization. I always see this. It's a real challenge. Training is difficult in every organization, but we critically need to upskill people. So the logistics and distribution world is looking, how do we upskill people? We've got a lot of, let's call them the more mature people in the organization who are going to be leaving, taking all of that knowledge with them. So how do we build people up through there? So what we're seeing now is subject matter expertise. Let's capture that, because it's just practical, not just academic, practical ways of working, but let's build that into pathways. Let's have different roles, different access points where we can bring this knowledge together and allow people to define a career, which might cross several different areas. And in fact, that would make you a stronger, a stronger individual in the organization, because you will understand some of the different areas that matter. And then the other big thing on top of that, Michael, is leadership. The leadership side is critical to this. So we may find people put into leadership roles who have not had much leadership experience and are expected to run teams. The phrase "the accidental learner" comes out. We see this all the time. So again, we can build, and we do this in eLearning. Plus, we have a roster of CPD certified courses we take people through. So there's a leadership pathway and program. So we can give people the skills and knowledge they need, but we can do this in a constructive way, in a way that works with the practicalities of being in a workplace environment and doing the things there, but also for wherever they may work. We've got different devices. Do you do that on a laptop? Do you do that on a tablet? Do you do it on a phone because you're remote working or you're field based? So again, we've got the ability to deliver knowledge-based content to people and push this across different devices.
That's very interesting. One of the point that you mentioned is kind of is the balance between the fragmented learning versus kind of the progression in a particular in a particular field. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, actually, because you did mention certified courses or certified trainings. Yeah, I know kind of in logistics, the one of the standardized global qualifications, the driving license. One of the other things that are kind of also people accept as a recognized qualification, so to speak, is the like Lean Six Sigma or black belts. So this is also a sort of recognized. Are there qualifications in logistics and supply chain that you're aware of, or they are kind of evolving, that would be transferable from organization to organization and will stay with an individual who has qualified on that?
Yeah, I mean, we're speaking with a number of universities at the moment to look at how people accredit, certain courses, and there are some universities that specialise in that world of logistics distribution. Probably the biggest thing we see across industry sector is CPD, so continuing professional development, where an organisation looks at the content and certifies it. And I think that's the biggest thing we're seeing, because that creates cross transferable skills. So for leadership, for example, we can have some CPD based learning where people are earning points and the quality of the learning delivered to them is assessed, and people are building the certification and certificates up. So I think you'll see a lot more CPD based stuff. CPC, as you mentioned before, now you're obliged to do that legally. And again, so we're going to see more and more accredited courses, I think, coming out. But I think built as pathways, because this is my personal view. Just a one-off course does very little to really help people move on. A program of courses, resources, knowledge-based activities, case studies, scenarios, sharing of all, that's the bit that really moves people on. So we need to get knowledge, but we also need to see behavior change. And behavior change means we've got to give people space to understand, practice some of these things. Are they given the opportunity in the workplace? Because if they don't, then the learning doesn't land as well as it could do and should do.
You are listening to Chain Reaction. This podcast is brought to you by Phlox, the leading marketplace for the supply chain and logistics industry. Visit phlox.is to find out how you find the perfect supplier or make your services available to prospective buyers. Thanks for tuning in. Now back to the show.
Well, you mentioned very good points, and I was actually thinking about it. There's a learning, there's knowledge, and there is ability to do stuff. And sometimes those are two different things. You can get a certification in something, but you would know how to touch a problem from one end or the other. So I can imagine that in order to kind of deepen the learning and deepen the skill set and ingrain the kind of the change in the ability in people on do stuff the right way, there must be most likely the most effective way is the combination of, I don't know, classroom versus sort of classroom and some of the classroom, some of the e-learning tools, some of the on the job being thrown into the deep end, kind of the blended models. In your experience, what seems to work best?
I think, as you've said, the best thing we see working is the blended model. And I think there are some really there's a good reason why that works. One, I think the problem with just purely classroom based is when people leave the classroom, the world takes over, everything happens, you forget what's gone on, several weeks have gone by, and it was a dim and distant memory from the past. If you just do some of the digital based stuff, you'll get some knowledge, but you might want the chance to discuss problems, challenges, how you would apply, what you would do, case studies, and various other things. So the combination, the blended learning, I think is powerful. And we see that in our clients all the time. That delivers the best results. And the reason being, I think that people can do some of these knowledge sessions and get the knowledge in, and they can go back again because they're going to forget because the world takes over. So they can go back and revisit and go, I remember that thing. Okay. We can also have guides and checklists and prompts as part of that digital learning. But people have the chance to question this and to question more in a workshop setting rather than a classroom-based setting. So all of a sudden, we've given the knowledge, so we've not wasted time in a classroom doing PowerPoints. Everybody can read their own PowerPoint. We don't need to do that. But we can go into the classroom and actually ask challenging questions about how we might deploy some of that learning. Then that starts sticking. The retention comes, it lands. But one other thing, Michael, is the key thing is after that learning, that the learner's got to be given the opportunity to put some of this stuff into practice. If they don't, then it does disappear. We just lose track of some of the things because the world's taking over, the day job's taking over. So if you want success, blended learning, building some opportunity for people to practice and keep revisiting that. Kind of build this continuous learning cycle into your organization, because then it stays at the forefront of people's minds.
Oh, it's very interesting. Also, I also wonder how the kind of the generational shift is also affecting that. Because I mean, and then the older generations, our generation, so we've learned from books and we've learned from, I don't know, classrooms and whiteboards. Now we have Gen Zs and very soon Gen Alpha going to be entering the workforce. They are accustomed to a completely different way of learning. Not completely different, but much more techy way of learning. So how do you think this is changing? Is that for good? Is that for better? I'm not saying that is that good for your business. I'm saying, is it good in terms of embedding the learning on the job as well as through various mediums and actually reinforcing that cycle that you just talked about?
I think it is, and I think that's a good thing because they're open to technology. They're open to using tools, apps, platforms. Um, they're not quite used to that. We're all sat in a classroom just watching somebody giving a PowerPoint and walking through that. They're more used to more interactivity and more engagement. So I see that as a positive thing, really. But again, what I come back to, relevance. I would say one of the things that these guys want to see more than anything is relevance. Why is this relevant to what I'm doing in my job? Does it help me do my job better? Do I understand why I'm doing some of these things in the first place? And so I would say that's more relevant. They're quizzing that a lot more than people might have done in the past. You go on a course, you sent on a course, and you did your course. Whereas these guys are saying, okay, in my job now, what would help me be better in role? What would be better as a team member, better as a leader? And okay, what are the things then? Give me the things that will help me do that. So I think that's the biggest difference I see for those kind of people who are moving into those kind of roles now.
I want to pick on the word that you've mentioned, relevance, and what it's. I'd like to actually focus on that for a little bit. Is very often it's there's are two types of learnings that we can talk about from the subject matter point of view. Is one, it could be generic learning. I'm just learning in general what I don't know, integrated business planning looks like, or SNOP process looks like. Or I could be learning very, very specific and relevant toolkit that is needed for me on that particular job in that particular company, because that company employs this tool set, and that tool set requires a special knowledge of how to operate it, how to use this, how to do that, and so forth. So what is the and that is my understanding as well, is that what your company, what your platform provides, as well as it's not just the ability to have a generic content on the subject, but also very, very specific customer secure, but customer or company specific topics that will allow a company to focus on upskilling internal colleagues, internal members, either cross skilling or upskilling, or embedding various degrees of knowledge. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that is a really good point, because we probably cover all of those things. So we have about 120 CPD certified courses now. Are they generic? Yes, they're what I would call foundational courses. So sometimes you need some foundational stuff. You've just got to go and do those things. If you're new to leadership and you need to understand coaching, we'll give you some knowledge about coaching, and we'll give you some models to use, and you'll understand how to start using those things. We call them power hours. Give us an hour, we'll teach you some foundational stuff. But there are certain times when you've got to get a lot more in depth to the role. I call this role specific training. We're working with a company called Laguru, who specialise, as you know, in the logistics distribution world, and we're creating some really in-depth, detailed courses, all the way from what we would call more foundational up through to advanced, where you have to have a lot more knowledge and understanding of key parts of that discipline. um, and so we build those. So those, you've got foundational courses we might have, you've got these more, let's call them industry-based courses, but then in your particular organization, you do things a certain way. You have certain SOPs that you use and how you want to do that. And therefore, what we can do, and we do a lot of bespoke building of courses and of course content, is to build the materials that work precisely with your SOPs, that introduce the right kind of knowledge and processes. And maybe you've done some process re-engineering or change management, but we have to reflect how that works in your business, in your industry, with your clients, with your people, in your context. And that is very different to just generic training. So that's why we spend a lot of time at understanding, what's the target audience for this? What the learning outcomes needed? How do we tie that to the strategic goals of the business? What are the capabilities and skills you need to deliver those strategic goals? What have you currently got with your people? There's some gaps. And that's often where we're looking at, okay, how do we build now the relevant courses to close those gaps? And in priority order, because you're not going to do this all in one go in an organization. So you can see how we're doing very specific things for the strategic goals of that organization.
No, makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. I want to look forward a little bit. I mean, we pretty much on every subject we talk about AI because it enters pretty much everywhere. But if we take a bit more kind of the general view on technology, how it affects the e-learning, a kind of a learning methodologies and approaches kind of going forward, how do you see that business, I wouldn't say business model, but the way we learn things, how do you think it will evolve, at least in the near future?
I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of the learning, in the way of work. So whilst I'm actually doing a job and I need some knowledge, I need access to that straight away. So we're going to see a change, of where and when learning is deployed. And AI is a great tool of that. So I give you an example with our platform. We have a workforce development platform, but we're building AI into there. And this isn't just a link to ChatGPT. People do that and say we're AI enabled. That doesn't mean anything at all, really. What we're using AI there is to understand, first of all, with the diagnostic. So a diagnostic of the organization and a diagnostic of the learner. Okay, now we start understanding this learner and their needs. But also then we need to deploy learning in different ways for different learners. So I might like interactive learning, Michael, you might like video based, some might like audio, some might like interactive PDF, some like workbooks. Okay, so we can deploy that in any way now that any learner wants across there. That's great. Okay, so we've now got choice, and this can match some of the diagnostic tools. But then also we might need some coaching behind there. So again, we're building the AI diagnostic tool, the AI course formatter, but also the AI coach, which says, okay, let me understand the needs and the needs today, this moment now of this learner compared to what we've said the organization needs, compared to what we've said you need overall as a learner. But how do we bring all of these things and tie together? That's what I think we're going to see. That's certainly what we're building into our workforce development platform. We're tying these things together. So at any one moment in time, we understand the learner's capabilities, the learner's challenges, some of the weakness and things we need to overcome. And we're able then to create structured pathways, courses, resources to start doing that at the time of need. And I think that's what we're going to see differently to what we've seen in the past, rather than just assigning you a course and you go off and do your course and then you come back and do your course. How do we help you on an ongoing daily basis to do that? How do we spread some of this learning and space some of this learning, but check that you're actually growing at the same time? So AI can be a great tool, and that's what we're building. So we can check, is this person growing? Are they developing? Is the learning landing? I like this concept of learning transfer. Are we transferring that learning? Are we seeing behavior change? Most important, are we seeing results in our business? So the KPIs, have they changed? So we can start tying this together. So that's what we'll want to see from technology, helping us manage all of these things and really move the organization and the individual forward.
Mm. Well, that tells me two things, interestingly. So one is, as you said, so it's not just learning for the learning's sake, it's also getting the technology to help tailor learning for the individual needs, given their performance, given their role, given their contribution, and the pace with which they work in the organization. So that's one element. So it's like it's wider. It goes slightly further than just simply, well, here's the content you have to memorize.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a little bit more than that. And the second thing is personalization. It's not just tailoring, well, you're going to learn this formula, but somebody else is going to learn a different formula. No, the formulas are the same, but the way that that formula is presented, the way that the learning is being given, this way can be tailored in order, as using your words, for that learning to land better,
Yeah, yeah.
to get more ingrained, more okay. Well, that's fascinating, that's interesting, and I can imagine that that would make a much more kind of engaging and interesting experience. We all remember the boring classes that we've all taken.
Definitely.
Well, I wanted to ask you this question now. So, you've seen how organizations kind of approach learning and skills and capability building, and how that the whole thing kind of evolves over time. But if you're given a magic wand and you could instantly fix a major problem or a challenge in how companies develop their people, what would it be?
I've kind of alluded to that already, and there's a model in the sort of the psychology learning world called COMBI. So it's capabilities, opportunity, motivation, and then behavior. So capabilities we can build. We'll do that. So we'll use the platform. We'll use content resources. We can build capabilities. Motivation, yeah, we've got to encourage people to be motivated, and we need volition behind there as well. So we can do that. What's often missing, though, for that behavior to happen is opportunity. So what would I want to do? I want to ensure that organizations and the leadership and as part of this, are looking at opportunities for this learning transfer to happen. And that's the big thing we're on for this year as e-learning plus, is how do we help with learning transfer? That means that it's landed, it means behaviors are changing, and that means I'm proactively using this stuff for the betterment of the organization and the betterment of the individual. So if I could wave the magic wand, it would be to get organizations to understand that just sending on a course, you come back, That isn't behaviour change, and nothing's going to magically happen. However, structure it well beforehand, before you even go on this training, and afterwards, and put the program of opportunity in place. Then we will see the difference. You will see the difference, and then your investment and the ROI is going to be far better.
Right. No, I think it makes perfect sense. Many leaders, and I've seen that before as well, are you sending your colleagues to a training, and then it's like they expect it as like a flicking a switch, like
Yeah,
all of a
yeah.
sudden everything changes.
Magic.
No, we won't. No,
Yeah.
it may, but it's not necessarily will. And then giving the colleagues opportunity to actually apply that knowledge, reinforce that knowledge to get it ingrained is absolutely critical. But
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's often underestimated, Michael. The power of and the capability of the leadership behind there. Your team leader or the manager in the leadership team and your colleagues. That's the bit that has to help this land, and that's often a little bit ignored, as you say. Flick the switch, and we're going to see the change. But that needs to be proactively built in, and leaders have to take some responsibility for that learning transfer. They have to do. They really have to get involved in this. I don't mean they have to spend huge amounts of time, but they have to be part of that journey.
yeah, it sounds to me like one of the kind of the silver lining takeaways from this conversation is that the success of learning is not about the toolkit, and it's not about the excellence of the course. It's about the leadership that of the colleagues, of the managers that enable people both to learn as well as to apply, to get that learning properly embedded in a business and in individuals. Well,
Yeah,
Terry, thank you very much for joining the conversation. That was absolutely amazing, and for sharing your experience and perspective. That was really insightful. Absolutely. And to everyone still watching and listening, thank you very much for staying with us. I hope you found this episode useful, and I look forward to welcome you again in the next episode of Chain Reaction Podcast. Thank you, Terry.
my pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to Chain Reaction. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have a story or insights to share from your sector, we'd love to hear from you. Simply reach out to us through the links in the description. See you next time.